Tonight's guest wishes to remain anonymous. With that in mind, I'm just going to call her Sundown. Sundown, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vic.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. Sundown, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, where to start that? I was raised in a big city in Chicago, specifically, and I always found that I resonated in the more country parts of the States. And even though Chicago had a lot to offer and had its own uniqueness, it was the concrete jungle. But I always tended to gravitate toward the country, which led me to a point in my life where I chose to move to Arkansas. And I had family there, and I was familiar with the land, and I was still pretty young at that point, in my late 20s. And when I did finally leave the state for good, the state of Illinois, and moved to Arkansas. But looking back now, I'm just amazed at my naiveness about what that meant. When I got there, when I moved there permanently, I just felt better than I ever had in my life up to that point. I loved the wilderness. I loved all the aspects of being in Arkansas, the lakes, the rivers, the outdoors, just general country living. And I had moved to a small town. At that time, it only had like 12,000 people. And it was just quaint and beautiful and relaxed. And the people were not in such a hurry and slowed down and enjoyed life. And I just really took to that. And I had been there a good 10 years, still in my naiveness, before I had my first encounter.
When you moved from Chicago to Arkansas like that, it was obviously a good thing for you, but it had to be one heck of a culture shock.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. I had visited many times, so it wasn't completely new to me. But when I drove a moving truck from Chicago to Arkansas, and specifically Mountain Home, Arkansas, I had stopped in Missouri to get gas and take a break, and it was probably a couple hours left of the trip. I walked in to pay my bill, and I realized I don't know what these people are talking about. The cashier and another customer were standing there having a conversation, and I was bewildered because I didn't understand what they were saying.
It's just that country dialect.
Yeah. And every region has that. If you're from any city or any region, you have your own kind of dialect, and people just kind of look at you like, huh? So I did that for quite a while. I would go, huh?
That's funny. I'm sure before too long you sounded just like them.
Yeah, my family from other regions, when I talk to them on the phone, they'd be like, you sound just like them now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Mm-hmm.
You've had both Dogman and Bigfoot sightings, Sundown. How would you compare what it's like to see one versus the other?
I would compare it where Dogman is a little more in your face, where the Squatch they're there until you are able to read or recognize that they are there. The Squatch, in my opinion, are more playful and interactive in a non-threatening way. Once you recognize the signs and the sounds and the smells and the reactions of your own animals to what's happening at that moment, you're just clueless. But the difference between Squatch and Dogman was in my face. I still didn't understand what was going on. I had no clue. But over time, I slowly learned what it was. And I kept all those memories in my mind because they were confusing. You know, it was, what was that? What's happening? But the Dogman definitely made himself known. He made it known. I think the Squatch do that also, but the Squatch are not as threatening in a way. They're not in your face. That's the only way I can put it.
Yeah, normally they're not. In my opinion, it's definitely better to have an encounter with one than the other. I don't need to name which one either.
Mm-hmm.
You had your kids with you when you had your first encounter. What's the fallout been like because of that?
My kids were pretty young, so they weren't as aware of what was happening at the time, but I wasn't either. I wasn't in the awares, so I didn't really begin talking about it more until like the last 5 years. And this happened toward the late 90s, maybe the very early 2000s, 2001, 2002. 2001 would be more accurate. So my children were still pretty young, and my reaction at the time was, you know, there's this dangerous thing happening. I called the police, told them what I saw and what happened, and I told them they need to get out there, otherwise someone was going to get seriously hurt. And my mind at that time too was, you know, I got to get these kids home and to bed, and got to get up early for work in the morning. And that's all I did. The impression or the effect of anything didn't happen till quite some time later.
Your kids sure are lucky they have such a great mom.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. All right, Sundown, please tell us about your encounters now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
I was living in the mountain home area at the time, and like I mentioned, my children were small. I had been out visiting my uncle's place one evening. It wasn't too late. I would say somewhere between like 10:30 at night. I was headed home, and of course it was dark. It's a small town. Everything was real quiet. That part of it didn't even occur to me, like, is anything different? But as I'm going along and almost to the end of my journey home, I looked up suddenly. You know, the roads aren't flat there. They're hilly and they twist and turn. So you just get used to knowing your area and how to drive it and what to expect. And all of a sudden, my headlights hit this huge black, what I thought at the time was a dog. And I remember thinking at the time, that's bigger than a St. Bernard. What the heck breed is that? But it was black, and it was laying down on my side of the road. And it happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react, and I hit it. I ran straight into it. But the thing that always confused me about it was that my car went airborne. All 4 wheels were off the ground. And having my children in the car and so quickly having my vehicle go out of control and go airbound was pretty profound. But I was very lucky. And when my car hit back down onto the road, I wasn't even in an oncoming traffic lane. I was right in my lane. And instead of slamming on the brake or doing anything like that, I just hit the gas and I kept going. So it was that quick and that smooth that I didn't have time to just sit there and, I snapped back into, got to get the kids home. It's late. But I did call the police at that point on my cell phone, and I described to them briefly what I encountered. And I told them it was the biggest dog I've ever seen. It's black. It's laying on the road, and you need to get out there because someone's going to get hurt bad. So I, of course, was shaken, but I managed to get home and get the kids all upstairs and put them to bed. And I did think about what occurred, but being that I was still so naive, life went on and I never heard anything from the police. They never questioned me or told me anything and I figure, it was done. It was just all taken care of and moved on with life, which brings me into the next encounter. It wasn't too long after that incident. I would say within a couple of weeks. Where I lived on the second floor, and there was a set of stairs, concrete stairs that led all the way up to my apartment. And I counted them one time because I wanted to know how many stairs are there that lead right up to my front door. There's 4 apartments on the lower half of the building and 4 apartments on the upper half where I lived. And as you walked up these 15 stairs, my front door was directly to your left. And it had like a porch, and there was a railing. When you looked off over the railing, there was a creek that ran through there. And I'd spend time out there when the kids were down in bed and go out on like the patio balcony. It wasn't a balcony and it wasn't a patio. It was just the upper stairs outdoor area, but it was open. So I could see the creek, and there was a grassy area leading up to the creek. And from where I would stand on my porch, I would say it was maybe 100 feet from the creek. So there was all this land that separated my apartment from the creek. And I had a good visual, being that I was on the second floor. It was a beautiful area. So when the kids would go to sleep, I'd go out on my patio, and sometimes I'd visit with neighbors and sometimes I wouldn't, just depend on what my time was like. I had a bunch of potted plants going across the rail on the ground, but going across. And so I'd sit out there and work on my plants. And I was real into growing hot peppers, chili peppers at that time. And when it began, I would hear off to my right along the property, but on the grass area, I would hear this walking, and it wouldn't be like it was right upon me. I could hear something walking bipedal, and then it would reach where I was, and it would stop. And this happened quite a few times to where I remember thinking, there's somebody lurking around. and assuming it was person. And the thoughts in my head at the time were, someone's zeroing in on me. They're obviously coming from a certain direction every time. I can hear their steps. And then if I just stayed real still and quiet, I could pretty well know how their movements are. And being up on the second story, I knew there were 15 steps that if somebody was going to try to confront me or assault me or whatever, they were going to have to run up them 15 steps before they actually got to me. So whenever this would happen, and it happened many, many times, I would say at least 10 times, but I would think, I'm going to plant myself right here in this certain spot where I can see the lower level. I can see if shadows move. I can hear real well. And if I see anything move, I would be right next to my front door so I could just open the door and go in. And I was thinking, I'd really like to get eyes on who this is and who's so dedicated to strange behavior. Is this a dangerous person? I was suspect because it happened so often. And at the time, I didn't connect it to the late night car deal. I just thought it was a different incident. It was a different thing going on. And this one night, after this happening so many times, I was getting bolder and bolder every time it happened. And in my mind, I wanted to know, who is this? I want eyes on whoever this is so that I can then report what's happening to management or police or whoever would help deal with it. And I was standing there and I heard what I thought was a person approaching, and it was playing out the same way it had, except I wasn't quite so like, what is that? I was like, there it is again. There it is again. So I'm in position by my door. I'm ready to go inside if somebody is bold enough to make a move that would warrant me to step in my house and play protector to myself and my family. And I was just standing there waiting for what I already had thought out in my mind. This happens, you're in the door. But maybe there's a chance you'll get a sighting so you won't sound crazy to people like they're just talking about some story. So I'm standing there and I'm mustering up the courage to just stand there and wait it out. This has been going on for way too long. So the next thing I know, there was this, I know it was directly underneath me on the ground or to where I couldn't see a shadow or couldn't see it. And this roar came out of the thing. It was so disturbing. And I've tried to mimic it, and when I was younger, I could do it more, the sound it made, but it was a sound that like could hardly be reproduced. And it went like this. It started out kind of low. But it got louder and louder and louder to the point that I felt it in every fiber of my being. And I also realized that I was shaking and bewildered, but I also couldn't move. So my plan to just grab the doorknob and go inside the house wasn't working out the way I thought it would. But it took every ounce of my being and having a preset plan to follow through with. I could barely do it, but I did it. I did it. I got the door open. I got inside. I struggled with the inside lock. I was shaken. And from that point on, I did not go hang out on the balcony, and I did not want to know what that was. So I avoided being out there at nighttime. And then I had found a house to move my family to, not too far from where I was living, but not too close either. Still in Mountain Home. And I moved into the house, and within the first few days of moving, I was up late one night hanging things on the walls and working in my daughter's bedroom. And there were no curtains on the windows yet. And this particular room faced the backyard. And the kids were asleep. It was, fairly late at night, but I was real happy to be in this new home and make it our own. And I was in that particular room. My daughter wasn't in there yet. I was still fixing it, and I was hanging a mirror on the wall, and I got that feeling, this disturbing feeling that I was being watched, and I couldn't shake it, but I didn't do anything real bold at that time. Something told me not to be real bold at that time, and I just preoccupied my body actions and just like I was unaware of whatever was there. And at one point, I even took the mirror to see and turned it to see if I could see anything. If I could see. Now, at this time, I'm thinking again, a person, not anything else. And I didn't see anything. So I finished placing the mirror, and I quickly walked out of the room and shut the door. And to the best of my knowledge, that was the first sign of something being wrong. Then, not too long after that, I had made arrangements with a neighbor who was getting rid of a dog. I told her once I get settled in my new place, I'll be happy to take him. His name was Leroy. Leroy was a good dog, and he was real good at alerting. Anything going on at any time, he would bark. As a matter of fact, he barked so much, I was like, all right, that's enough barking. I had to get him not to bark so much. And he did. He learned real well. But in the middle of the night, I'd be fast asleep, and the rest of the house would be all quiet. And Leroy would really like, which was enough to stir me up. And once I was awake, I started to hear sounds. So I would tell Leroy, hush. And I would just sit there real quietly, real quiet, and listen. And I would hear movement, like bipedal movement around the house, around my room, outside, and going back toward our backyard. And this started happening on a regular basis, where the dog would wake me up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. It happened so much that I would just tell Leroy, hush, real quietly. And then I would pull the phone, the landline, down close to me so I could just pick up the handset and quietly dial the police station without alerting whatever was outside of the house that I'm onto them. And then I'd just sit there quietly until the police came to the door. And basically, they would come out and look all around the property. And then they'd come knock on the door and say, yeah, there's nothing. And I'd say, there's definitely something. And they were real nice about it. And after it happened so many times, I apologized to them and I said, look, I'm really sorry, but I know something's happening here. And because it's such a quiet, sleepy little town, they're hearing you come before you even get here. And they're gone or they're hidden somewhere. And the officer that time was like, darling, don't you worry. She said, if you call us as many times as you need to. And that did make me feel better. But it happened so many times that I began to question my sanity. The occurrences were happening more and more and more to the point where I wasn't sleeping. I was automatically like attuned to listen for the movement, or at one point telling my family about it. My two uncles, they were both offering me guns to protect myself and my family. So I was verbal, with the local police department and friends and family. But even so, it was still so elusive. And then one night, I was laying in bed and the dog alerted me. And I remember that night was a full moon or a partially full moon. I wasn't particularly paying attention, but at the front of the house where my bedroom windows were was lit up by the moonlight. And after Leroy alerted me, I just laid there real still and real quiet and just listened and watched. And this head appeared. There were blinds on the windows, but because of the brightness, I could still see the shadow of what was walking in front of my bedroom window. And my bedroom windows were in the front of the house. And if you made a left, I had another window in my room there that led to the backyard. Backyard gate was right there. And if you continued into the backyard, now you're looking into my children's windows. And I watched this thing walk across my front windows, take a left, and go toward the backyard. So, of course, I was panicked. I never really even saw that much of it up until that point. And then I called the police. And same old scenario. They didn't find nothing, but don't worry. Call us as often as you need to. And eventually, I moved out of that house. I was just too nervous all the time and not able to rest there and function normally. It was a nice house and I loved the area, but there's just too much going on. So it didn't really stop, but there was a break. After I had moved from that house, there was a break in occurrences. It wasn't quite so intense. And then eventually I just left the state of Arkansas together and I moved back to Illinois. And then after that, I was able to, resume some normalcy in my life. And the entire amount of time that I originally lived in the state of Arkansas was 12 years. And then I moved back to Illinois and was there probably a good 10 years. And then I decided to move back to Arkansas. I was living in an area called Bull Shoals. And there were different kinds of encounters there, but one of the incidents was I had some friends over, and there was a blood moon that night. So it was this big, bright red moon in the nighttime sky. And as it got closer to being able to see the moon more clearly, we decided we were going to go for a walk down the road and get a better look at it. And we did. We started walking down this road. It was a real steep, hilly road that led down to the White River. And we're walking along. It's real dark. It's country. And we're walking down this road, and we hear a bipedal creature. I knew at this time I didn't imagine it was a person just by the way it suddenly made itself known to us. And as we're walking down the road, it was step for step with us. Every time we took a step, and there was 4 of us, so every time we took a step, this thing took a step. And then we'd all, kind of look at each other like, what is that? And we're like, I don't know. And then it walking again, and it would be step for step with us. And it was getting so creepy that one of the people I was with said, maybe we should go back home. And I was like, no, just stay calm. Let's go a little bit further. So we kept walking, and it was right with us, step for step. Very creepy. Was off in a more heavily wooded area, step for step with us. And it just wasn't relenting. It wasn't like being distracted by anything else, and it wasn't acting right. So then I agreed, and I said, yeah, let's go home. And we all walked quite a bit quicker back to the house, probably 5 to 10 minutes, as long as it took for us to feel safe again and be in an area where this thing wasn't. And it was all a very heavily wooded area, but right next to where the property where I lived were caverns, the Bull Shoals Caverns, it's called. And aside from heavily wooded areas and rivers and a lake, and now looking back, it was the most ideal place for, a cryptid, a dogman or squatch or whatever to habitate. And even still at that point, so many years later, I wasn't really quite clear about all these experiences I had and how much trouble it caused me, and stress, anxiety, and fear, how much it had affected my life. And then I made the decision to move out of Bull Shoals and back to Mountain Home. And I did. And it was then I was listening to a podcast, Brenton Son show. I was really new to listening to podcasts at that time, and I just happened upon it, and I liked it because it had a Christian point of view to explain the mysteries and cryptids. And it was the first one, well, not the actual first one, but pretty close to be one of the first podcasters that I liked listening to, and like the way he talked and explained things. And he would have a lot of people on his show that he would talk about their experiences. And it was at that time, like everything clicked, listening to different encounters and experiences of real people. It was a revelation how everything just snapped into focus. And at first, I thought only about seeing the head through my bedroom window. But then over time, as I had time to sit with it and really think about it, it occurred to me the time I hit that animal I couldn't recognize. And I have a clear memory. Can't guarantee it's complete, but I have a clear memory in my mind. This animal was so big. It was bigger than a St. Bernard, probably 3 times the size of St. Bernard. It was all black. And because of the way it had itself positioned in the road and how quickly the whole encounter happened, I didn't see eyes. I didn't see ears. It was almost like, an animal just laying down in the road, like you might see. So I didn't see anything that made me think it was anything other than a dog, except the size. And the fur was blacker than black. So after moving back to Mountain Home and discovering Brenton, and it wasn't that long afterward that I found Vic's show, and I just kept listening, and I just kept collecting all these different memories and pieces of things that had occurred, and feeling like I have discovered the answers. But what do you do with that? Because now I'm sounding like a lunatic. So it was, especially your show, Vic, your voice and the way you approach talking to people who have these encounters and make yourself available to people to express things. And it took me, I'm going to say, about 5 years from that point where I discovered Brenton and Vic. And I would make comments on Vic's show, but I still wasn't ready. I still wasn't ready to actually make contact. And it wasn't until recently that I was like, I can do this now. I had enough time to think about things and listen to others and realize, no, you're not alone in this. Because I definitely felt completely alone. Family I talked to, friends that I talked to, people that I trusted, who trusted me, would just not know how to respond to the stuff I was talking about. So I'm glad to share my story if it can help anyone else. And I feel like I've done my job.
It's awfully impressive that you're so concerned about helping people. That's great. And so that you know, one of the several things we have in common is the fact that neither one of us breaks for Dogman. I'm not going to wreck my truck trying to keep from hitting a Dogman that's dumb enough to get between my headlights. No way. Before we get back to tonight's show, I wanted to let you know that the premium membership program is up and running. As a premium member, you wouldn't have to listen to commercials, and also you'd have full access to bonus episodes. If you'd like to find out more about how to become a premium member, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast. When you saw that head through your bedroom window, you said it had to be at least 10 feet tall for you to be able to see its head. But did you ever see ears on the top of its head?
I saw an outline, and it was a large head. And it did come to a point at the top, like ears. I wasn't looking at it, the shade was down, and it was so bright outside. In order for the moonlight to cast a shadow at the trajectory of my windows, I've thought about this a lot. This thing had to be at least 10 feet tall. At least. I'm not saying it was 10 feet tall. I'm just saying it had to be at least that tall to cast a shadow down from the moonlight onto my window. It was a large head, and it had, from the outline that I could see, it had pointed ears. What else could it be?
Yeah, that does narrow it down. For anyone listening who thinks you just ran over a big black dog, what would you say to them about that?
Well, I would say to them that I'm well familiar with animals, all kinds of different animals, and I think I've got a pretty good idea of what would classify as normal and abnormal. But the thing that I think about, that I've thought about over time, is how in the world do you run into something like that and it throws your car into the air? All four of my wheels were not on the ground. I was airborne. I was struggling and gripping the steering wheel, praying that we were going to live through this. And when the car hit the road again, I had that steering wheel gripped in my hands tighter than probably ever. And instead of hitting the brakes, I hit the gas and kept going. And I was less than 5 minutes from my house. So 5-10 minutes, not that far from my house. And if you hit a domestic animal or even a deer, there's a lot of that going on out there. 1, it wrecks your car. 2, you usually wreck. And 3, there's a body. Not that I chose at that time to get out and inspect what was going on. I had my reasons for that, basically my children. Their safety and well-being was my main concern. But then it's not like I, sat around and had the time and luxury to just think about creepy things all the time. But over a long period of time and all this information, with technology being what it was, all of a sudden I expanded out and heard other accounts, and it was the only time that everything clicked. And it took me a while to take all those different situations and kind of piece them together. It was overwhelming, really. And I just took my time and tried to think as thoroughly back into my memory what exactly happened at that time. And it brought me to where I am now, talking about it. And I would say to anyone who wants to maybe poo-poo whatever, that's your choice, but I can lead you to 20 other people who'll say, nope, this is the story she told me that long ago, and it's exactly the same as I'm describing it today.
You know how it is. You're always going to have naysayers, but you know what you saw, so that's all that matters. We've already established the fact that you've seen both Dogman and Sasquatch Sundown, but what makes you so sure it wasn't a Sasquatch you ran over that night instead of a Dogman?
Because of the roar, the way I'll do it again, it went like this. Real low pitched. And the longer I stood there and listened, it got louder and higher pitched and louder to the point where I was frozen. I couldn't move. That right there, and the actual head I saw from the moonlight in the sky walking across the front of my house. And there was nothing like that prior. And as a matter of fact, the obvious occurrences were, whoa, explain a roar to me. Never heard anything like that before. And an actual visual on a head from my bedroom, that thing had to be at least 10 feet tall to even make a shadow for me to see. And then it was a while longer. It came back to me as I was sifting through my memories and things that had happened, that I had an epiphany. There was that one night when I hit that big animal. That has to be it. That was what started these other things happening. Not saying the occurrence in Bull Shoals, that was probably just a separate, different animal. But like I've said too, if it's a Dogman, they're more aggressive. They're more in your face. They're more like, surprise! Where the Squatch I've encountered, they're not as intrusive. Not in my experience. Now, maybe it had been that way for other people, but whatever I was doing wasn't pissing them off. That's all I can say. We were just kind of coexisting, which was fine. But the Dogman was a whole other story.
They normally are. Why do you think it was laying on the road the way it was?
I can speculate, because I've asked myself that question. Why? Those things move fast and quietly, not to where the average person would pick it up, those noises or smells or anything. If they were paying attention, I think that with a Dogman or even a Squatch, even if they wanted to mess with you, could easily. And that particular night, I was a lone car out on the road, and it decided, hey, I'm going to run down the road here and just lay in the road. And I can't even speculate why anything would choose to do something like that, but it did it. So it had a reason, and I don't think it was a coincidence. I think I probably really pissed it off that I didn't wreck, or I didn't swerve or go down into a ditch. And then not long after that, it made itself very known with that roar. I was still naive. I didn't piece it all together. It was stuff that I couldn't even imagine. So you go on living your life, and then, like me, it all just sort of clicked at a certain point. And even then, I wasn't ready to really even talk to anybody. Then I was more about listening to other people and hearing how it affected them and what exactly happened during their encounters. And there's a large variety of that information going on out there. But at this time in my life, I'm a lot more comfortable because of technology and, the sharing of information from real people, not what's put on regular broadcast television and through the movies and that. I'm good now. I'm not saying that it still doesn't affect me in some way, because it certainly does and did change my life. First going through it and then coming to terms with what it really is, and not worrying so much about people thinking I'm crazy. There's a lot of that going on. And then either people will look at you like you're crazy, or they'll just be like, okay, you're my friend. I've known you forever. If you say this happened, I believe you. But it sounds crazy. So I'm not saying that there was an absolute beginning and an absolute end to this whole experience. I'm not sure what the future holds. None of us can be. But I feel like at least I'm not naive. And I'm a lot more cautious in what I do. It doesn't prevent me from spending time in the woods or at the parks or anywhere. But I'm more confident in that, at least with the two particular Dogman and Squatch, that, at least I have some knowledge of what's happening. And at this point in time, I can still enjoy things I love. And if there's any way for me to put out what happened that might help somebody else come to terms, then I feel good about that. I feel good because I know through most of it, I felt very alone.
It's awfully impressive that you'd be concerned about helping other people like that. That's good. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Sundown, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I'd like to thank you, Vic, because you're a very large part of it, even though you're unaware. But there are other people out there, and you're not alone.
Well, I just feel lucky to be in a position to be able to help eyewitnesses such as yourself, so I wouldn't have it any other way. But having said that, thanks again so much for coming on and sharing those experiences with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks again so much. Have a great night.